as rain falls upon faces of the children who look skyward. Twisting metal through the...
Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of the Hexes and Soldiers War Game Podcast. This will prove to be the first case study that I have done regarding a particular subject. I plan to do a couple of these, if not more, regarding a very pinpointed subject, which we will break into eventually here. The subject of this particular case study will be opportunity fire. I've been dealing with this a lot, trying to find the Goldilocks blend of opportunity fire to interject into advanced platoon leader, trying to figure out what works, what doesn't, what's realistic, what's not. And I thought, based on all the stuff I've been doing, research, comparing and contrasting, I thought maybe I'll just share my findings with the listeners. So that's what I aim to do. And the music that preceded this introduction should be, if I'm not mistaken, something from The Pretty Things, specifically an album called SF Sorrow. If you're unfamiliar with this, familiarize yourself with it because it is a fantastic album. Let's see, it is one of the first rock concept albums, and in fact, it precedes The Who's Tommy by, let's see, that came out in 69, and work started on SF Sorrow in 67, so got that beat. And I think it's better. Of course, I am biased, but SF Sorrow is, let's see, based on a short story by singer Phil May. Not familiar with who that is, but the album is structured as a song cycle telling the story of the main character Sebastian F. Sorrow from birth through love, war, tragedy, madness, and the disillusionment of old age. I've listened to this album a number of times and never grow tired of it. Every time I listen to it, seems to get a little better. So some great music if you're interested there. All of you that were worried about the sick kitty, Kitty is no longer sick and acting very kitty-like these days. Everything is a play toy. The cat has recently learned how to launch itself onto my leg and climb up into my lap as I sit on my stool at the gaming table. And I have to say, it's a lot. Here we go. She's getting ready to jump. No, I dissuade you. Uh, yeah, it's a lot of fun because her claws are like fish hooks. But trying to break her that. So, oh, another quick thing while I'm thinking of it. I do have a mute button on this. I rarely use it. I should learn to use it or use it more often. In the olden days, I would go through these episodes when they were finished, when I was done recording, and edit out all the coughs and hacks and clearings of throats. And I thought, I can't have any of that in there. But as time went on, it's just so time consuming to listen to the whole thing again and edit out those things. And I will, if I can, try to do better and remember to simply mute when I have to clear a throat or cough because I have an allergy to pretty much everything. So that makes for an interesting existence. That said, moving right along, what else do we have? A couple quick updates. Just got back from the library. It was a very rewarding day of chess. Every Saturday, I head the chess league here in New Orleans at the main library downtown New Orleans, and I teach students as well as play grandmasters and get my butt handed to me. But one particular student, he's come a long way, and very proud of him. He was able to sit down and play an individual who's a fairly good chess player and beat him. So it was a lot of fun to see this older gentleman celebrate and jump up and down. And I thought, well, heck, I got to make this. I got to fade his excitement. So I printed out a chess certificate of achievement and signed it and gave it to him. So that was a lot of fun. And got the house to myself, being as the lady friend is indulging in some Dungeons and Dragons, something I thought I would never see, But then again, I'm seeing a lot of things I thought I'd never see. She's become very involved in working out, weightlifting. The running thing's been going on for a while now. I don't care to do any of that stuff. If you're not going to pay me to do it, I just don't see the point. Yeah, I get it. You get healthy, you get what, more energy, you sleep better, better frame of mind. But is it worth all that? I don't know. So yeah, she's playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I guess she can no longer look down her nose at me in my games. Not that she necessarily ever did. And I must add, to her defense, I may have been a little harsh on her in the last episode. In fact, somebody chimed in and said, if your girl isn't going to tolerate you playing games, and you shouldn't tolerate her. Well, they didn't say that exactly, but in so many words, that's what it was inferred. And she's very tolerant of my gaming enthusiasm. And perhaps what frustrates her the most is that the type of stuff that I play and the nature of it being inclined towards the recluse solitaire angle, I think she feels left out. So perhaps I'm the one to blame if she turns her head in dismay at the stuff that I do because it is not as inclusive as she would like it to be. So there. That said, let's move along to the special episode, the case study number 1, Opportunity Fire. I have another piece of news, but I think I'll segue into it via Opportunity Fire when we get to it. So, Opportunity Fire. When did it start? When did somebody? Granted, the morale thing is brilliant, and I would love to do a case study on that alone. But at some point, and I want to attribute this to John Hill, but I probably wrong, and if I am, feel free to correct me. But John Hill came along with a game called Squad Leader, and you knew this there was going to be some Squad Leader stuff in this. And he has something called Defensive Fire. So I suppose in a roundabout that way, that's where it comes from. But see, he has a whole Defensive Fire phase. Well, let's read that real quick, and then we'll go to some other things. If you get the old rulebook, Original Squad Leader 4.4, you have the Defensive Fire phase in which a player may fire any of his units at enemy units currently within their line of sight or who moved in the preceding movement phase through their line of sight. So whereas a lot of games are the I go, you go, that's it. This allows a little extra ability to more or less fire at units that moved. It's not a bona fide turn. It is just, again, an opportunity. It's a great word. To fire at somebody that moved, more or less. I think that's where this got its start. Again, I could be wrong. Probably am. Feel free to correct me. But that is the original squad leader. If you move from that to, yeah, you guessed it, advanced squad leader. Well, let me find that here. 1 second. I will read what that says. Oh, and I should add that with defensive fire and squad leader, you have these little targets that you set on each hex that is moved through, so you can bring the unit back to those targets and attempt to fire at him as he moved. Again, the idea is brilliant, but it was a little archaic at that point, and it would become streamlined quite a bit. When you get to advanced squad leader, you got all kinds of stuff going on. You've got defensive fire, but then it turns into first fire. Then you go to subsequent first fire, final protective fire, final fire, etc. So they really break it down to a number of things, basically complicating it necessarily. I don't want to say unnecessarily. I mean, the ASL is the no pun intended, the leader of detail when it comes to tactical wargaming. But it's pretty involved, and I don't know that this appeals to everybody, especially beginner. I don't know that they're going to get this. It's not going to make much sense. Without going into everything, suffice to say there are a number of steps regarding defensive fire or opportunity fire. It works, but it's involved. And if you want something to be realistic, I suppose it's got to be involved and detailed. Moving on from that, I really glossed over that, but I already assume a lot of you that listen are familiar with what that is. If you're not, you can read up further. In fact, there's a really cool demonstration on the MMP website, or there used to be. It's kind of a flash example of play regarding defensive fire with sound effects. I would direct you to that if you are somewhat unfamiliar with defensive fire via advanced squad leader. Moving on from that, you have something called Conflict of Heroes. Great game. So the way they deal with opportunity fire is as such. And they kind of expand on the idea of opportunity fire. So rather than simply firing, they allow you to take an opportunity action. So with Conflict of Heroes, they have action points that you spend, a unit spends to perform various actions. So what they say regarding opportunity actions, which includes opportunity fire, says a player can take an opportunity action with a fresh unit only. So a unit that has already acted can't do this. An activated or spent unit may not take an opportunity action. Any one action costing any number of action points, such as firing once, moving one hex, rallying, etc., may be taken as an opportunity action. So again, they really expand on the concept, and I guess it works, but I don't know that that should include anything beyond firing as a reaction to movement. Again, it says this action does not cost the player action points, but the unit is marked as spent after completing the action. Now, this gets into the give and take. You and this is what I was dealing with last night and trying to bang some of this out for advanced platoon leader. You don't want to make opportunity fire too appealing so that people opt to use it more than firing in a regular fashion. That is to say, if you can fire and not have to, I should back up with Advanced Platoon Leader, it's a similar system to Conflict of Heroes, as is Platoon Leader, the game that precedes it, in that you have actions that you spend. Now, if you can opportunity fire without spending an action, what's the point of firing and spending an action to do so during a regular turn when you can opportunity fire for free? So you have to make it where it's allowable, but it isn't preferable, if that makes sense. So, um, yeah. And then they give an example, and the designer note says, taking an opportunity action with a fresh unit is often less efficient than waiting to activate the unit later in the round. But sometimes a player needs to immediately react to a situation with a unit without making the activated unit as spent or using command action points or cards. And I won't get into particulars of that, but that should be sufficient enough by way of explanation. And I should also add, which I failed to do within games, as a preface to the whole opportunity fire, how realistic is it to have opportunity fire in a game? Well, until we figure out a better way to model what happens with opportunity fire, which is basically just a off the hip reaction to a particular action, the way that it is evolved is the best of all possible worlds, which I will get to. Again, additionally with morale, I mean, I don't know how we're going to move past this and model it any better than the way it already is, which I talked about in another episode, creates somewhat of a conundrum. And how are these tactical games going to evolve? How are we going to innovate new systems to continue moving forward? Have we reached the apex of development with tactical war games? It's a question to consider. Some of you may add no, and others yes. What should I move to next? A couple options here. Let's go to Band of Brothers. Band of Brothers is a game system Um, that works well. There are a couple games out now. I think a third is on the way. Not a lot of rules. I think 20 pages of Ghost Panzer, which is the second game of rules. And you may be surprised or not, but when it comes to Opportunity Fire in Section 9.0, they they spent some time with this. So let's roll through it, shall we? Opportunity Fire, OpFire for short. In fact, can I just say that from now on, OpFire? When a player is moving a unit, as we would expect they do on occasion, the other player may have an opportunity to fire at that moving unit. Nothing new there. This is called OpFire, which we already knew. OpFire must be conducted as an enemy unit is moving. The non-moving player may not back up a unit to a previous hex in order to fire at it. The moving player should give the non-moving player an opportunity to say they are firing. Now here's something else to consider real quick if I may. With Conflict of Heroes, they allow movement as a reaction to an action. I don't know that that works. I could be wrong. Seems like if you were going to assault somebody, if every time you moved you could react and move away, they would never be able to reach you, and I don't know how realistic that is. Anyway, that's just a side note. Where was I? This can only be conducted by units that are not marked as used. A unit does not need to be marked with an OpFire counter to OpFire, although being marked OpFire can increase a unit's proficient firepower. So I'm liking what they got with this. It sounds like you can pre-designate a unit to OpFire, which will give you a die roll modifier to get a better chance of hitting or coming up with a casualty result of sorts. OpFire may be conducted at a moving unit in the hex in which it began the turn if the first hex it would enter is that of an enemy unit. It is subject to all the modifiers that it normally would be, including possibly moving in open ground. A unit uses its proficient firepower when OpFiring, which is, I believe, is if I remember correctly, there's two different firepower factors on the counters here. One is better than another. When firing at a moving unit, the same die roll also affects non-moving units and the target hex of the moving unit, although modifiers to the firepower may be different for the different units. That's different than the way some other systems handle this. So to reiterate, when firing at a moving unit, the same die roll also affects non-moving units in the target hex. Now that's not your typical run-of-the-mill OpFire stuff. You usually, when you fire at a moving unit, a moving unit, the only the moving unit is affected if it happens to move and hex with other units that are not moving. Only the moving unit is affected. Now, is that realistic? It's arguable. Let's see. Goes on to talk about modifiers regarding fire. Any number of units may attempt to OpFire at the same moving unit in the same hex. OpFire that results in suppression requires the moving unit to pass an immediate morale check. Now, again, I think this is something a little different for Band of Brothers. Or its move immediately ends and it is marked as used. Units that were declared as retreating at the start of their move continue to get -4 to their check. Let's see. And then if you go to 10.0, you have something called Final Opportunity Fire. So not quite as detailed as ASL, but a similar mechanic and breakdown. Similar to regular OpFire, except that it is conducted by units that have been marked as used. So basically units that have already done this or already fired, etc. Units that are marked used may only perform limited actions in the operations phase. Unlike OpFire, Final OpFire may only be conducted against moving units that are adjacent. So this is very similar to Final Fire, or Final Protective Fire in ASL, in which you can only fire at adjacent units. The unit may attempt Final OpFire every time an enemy unit moves adjacent. So this is, although there are a couple things in here that are different and innovative, you can tell it was inspired by ASL, and that's not a bad thing. Imitation is the highest form of flattery, right? That is Band of Brothers. Let's head over to the lock and load realm. Though I'm for some reason reluctant to do so, I will. Let's see what they have to say. Alright, if you turn to I'm using the Heroes of the Pacific rules booklet, and if you head to 5.3 on page 16, you have a whole page dealing with opportunity fire. And they deal with it by saying units that are not marked with a moved, low crawl, stealth, or fired marker, and that have a clear line of sight to a hex in which an enemy unit expends at least one movement point by any kind of movement other than low crawl or stealth movement, can fire on the movers. This is called opportunity fire. It occurs during the opposing player's impulse and is not considered an impulse. Low crawling units can only be the target of opportunity fire if they are spotted in the hex they enter. So a unit entering a hex with a movement point cost greater than 1 can be subject to opfire attacks equaling the movement point cost of the hex. Again, the same as in ASL. You can fire as many times as movement points are expended in a hex. So if it costs 2 movement points to move into a hex, then you can fire twice. Yeah, moving units cannot be attacked more than once per movement point expended in the hex, unless attacked by support weapons with a to hit table on the back of their counter, etc. Place a fired marker on units that opfire. Conduct opfire attacks like any other, with the exception that the attacker receives a +1 bonus to their die roll for firing at moving units. Now, I don't know if I agree with that. You receive a bonus just because the unit's moving? Well, now I can see if he's moving in the open. Now I can see if he's moving cautiously. But just plain old moving, you get a bonus for firing at it? Unless the moving units are in terrain that negates that modifier. Okay, there's that. If the target hex contains both moving and non-moving units, both are affected by the same attack die roll. Alright. But only the moving units suffer the +1 modification to the attacker's die roll. And then they work in some spotting rules. You got to see this stuff before you can fire at it type deal, which I've always been a fan of. It's just more realistic. Note that even though moving units are automatically spotted, the stationary squad in the hex retains the unspotted status that it had prior to the attack if the moving unit exits the hex. In other words, if the stationary unit wasn't spotted before the opfire attack, it remains unspotted after the moving squad departs the hex. This is the only exception to the rule that states if one unit in a hex is spotted, the entire hex is spotted. That is how lock and load Heroes of the Pacific deals with it. We have something called Old School Tactical. Very nice, pretty, fluid game system. You can tell this thing was hammered out until it was just extremely aerodynamic set of rules. I'm not feeding you again. Sorry. Let's see, where is that in here? Should be right here. So, page 18, section 31, 9 short paragraphs regarding opfire. Very succinct. When your opponent is moving, you can ask for a halt and fire at the unit at any point during the move. It's pretty straightforward, right? You spend an impulse point and carry out the attack as normal, sort of like Conflict of Heroes with the action points. If there's no effect, the unit continues its move. A group can be used for opfire as long as 2 impulse points are spent. As this occurs during your opponent's impulse, it is still considered your next impulse, even after an opfire. A moving unit or group may be attacked once per hex moved into with opfire. So rather than dealing with movement point expenditure as it correlates to being how many times you can fire at a unit in a hex, You can simply attack once per hex moved into, and that's it. Only one unit of a group may be attacked in a hex without fire. Then they have luck cards and off-board strikes may not be used as an opportunity fire. And finally, op fire cannot be used once the enemy has reached its final hex of movement. If the move is finished firing on that unit, it now becomes a normal attack. So there's something else to consider. Do you allow a unit to be, regarding op fire, do you allow a unit to be fired at in its starting hex? Typically, no. But why does that have to be necessarily so? Do you allow opportunity fire in the destination hex, the final hex? Well, some people look at it differently than others. Some say yes, some say no. The argument remains. And that brings us to anything else of note. I had this all written down. All the various tactical systems we could consider. Again, I will ignore the tactical combat series. Let's see. All right, that leaves combat commander and fighting formations. We'll do combat commander. They're both somewhat similar. People seem to be more familiar with combat commander, much to my chagrin. Well, they have opportunity fire as well. If you go to page 16, section A33.1, prerequisite: a fire action may only be played during an opponent's move order and only just after the expenditure of one or more movement points as a moving unit enters a new hex. This type of reactionary fire is termed op fire. Note that fire actions are listed across the top of any fate card and that has one in the same position as for a fire order. As a reminder of its dual capability, the word fire will, when appearing along the top of a fate card, always be preceded by the words order/action. So those of you not familiar with Combat Commander, card driven, cards. You're not going to be able to op fire without a card. Procedure: generally, when the active player is performing a move order, he should count aloud his unit's accumulated movement point expenditure in each hex it has entered. Each time such an expenditure is made, the inactive player has the option to call out wait. Do you guys do that? You say, hey, wait, and temporarily halt movement. If he does, he may choose to do either or both of the following: play a fire action from his hand and activate one or more units to fire at the hex. Make one fire attack against the hex with any of his units that were activated for op fire at any point during this same move order. After any such fire attack is made or the opportunity to do so is declined, the active player may continue with his move order. Then there's exceptions to op fire regarding ordnance weapon. No more than one fire attack may be made by the inactive player per movement point expenditure. So it sounds like half your ability, unless I'm mistaken, to implement opportunity fire in Combat Commander deals with whether or not you have a card. And I typically hate that, but regarding opportunity fire, also you have to consider, should you be allowed to perform op fire whenever, as often as you like? I would say no. There's going to be times when you're looking somewhere, which is hypothetical, opposite direction perhaps of a unit that you are unaware of, location-wise. Probably don't notice it for a while, which means what, a hex. So the God's eye view of being able to see everything that goes on, every hex that is entered, you have a bead on the unit allegedly. Is that is that realistic? No, probably not. So again, should you be allowed to, time after time, at will, conduct opportunity fire, or should there be some sort of built-in fail-safe? Is that the right word? Mechanism that perhaps disallows you from being able to conduct opportunity fire every single time. So, for instance, I think Band of Brothers allows for a morale check to conduct opportunity fire. Better units will be more often able to conduct opportunity fire. That allows for the possibility of not being able to, taking into account any number of X variables. Again, not seeing the unit until too late, or not having a good shot, or hunkering down behind a wall and just not looking, avoiding fire, cowering, etc. Are you really always going to be ready and able to conduct opportunity fire, and not only that, effectively? So these are all things that I'm wrestling with, dealing with. What do I have so far? I'll share that with you, I guess. All this is in the works, subject to change, being modified, etc. So, how does Advanced Platoon Leader thus far deal with opportunity fire? Well, but I guess before I go into Advanced Platoon Leader and how I deal with it, I should also add you might want to check out the Advanced Tobruk system, which is similar to ASL but different. Every time I bust those rules out and flip through them, there are more things that I like and appreciate. And I should give that system more attention than I do, as should you probably. If you have access to the latest edition of Advanced Tobruk System rules, flip through them. There's some good stuff going on in there. But also, there's something called retro, and I'm not that familiar with it. Some of you may be more so than me, others not at all. And with retro, I think opportunity fire is automatic. It's not optional. From unit moves within 3 hexes, op fire is going to happen. So there's a simplistic approach of dealing with it. But again, back to Advanced Platoon Leader. Got a couple of sections here that deal with it, and you'll see why in a second. So basically, your first off um, section is, and the way I'm working on these rules is I have options, a paragraph, then or, a paragraph, then or. So that separates possibilities, if that makes any sense. So this particular section is preceded by a bunch of questions. Can a spent unit conduct op fire? So within the game, I guess you have something similar to Conflict of Heroes, in which a unit expends action points to perform actions, and there's only a certain number that you can spend, and then you become spent. Well, let's say a spent unit has the potential to conduct opportunity fire. Well, should he be able to because he is spent, or not able to? Um, should it cost an action to conduct opportunity fire? Can a unit conduct opportunity fire versus a unit that is moving at a distance further than that of the closest known enemy unit? In other words, are you really going to give a crap if some unit 500 meters away moves while there's somebody that you are very focused on 40 meters away? Um, you know what I mean? Are you going to give that much attention to somebody in the background as opposed to the foreground? What else? Um, so a couple of things. When a unit moves within a certain amount of squares of an enemy unit that has an action to spend, that enemy unit may conduct opportunity fire. This is just theoreticals that I have. And then in a highlighter after that, if it passes morale checks, so that should sound familiar. I'm considering things here. Or conduct a morale check to perform opportunity fire. Additionally, every square in between the firer and target, not including the target and firer square, becomes a positive die roll modifier. So you will be less inclined to conduct opportunity fire at something that is further and further away from you. You will be more inclined to do so at units that are closer. Um, got opportunity fire is conducted at half firepower. Typically, this coincides with conducting one action. So if you expend one action, you're only going to fire at half firepower. You need to expend 2 actions to fire at full firepower. That's just standard throughout the game. Let's see. Then I have something that I'm leaning towards here. A unit that has yet to expend an action may conduct opportunity fire at half firepower, which is subject to change, the half, for 1 action point against a moving unit within line of sight and range. However, and here's the catch, After conducting out fire, the unit is not turned to denote the spending of an action. So where units that conduct an action are typically turned 90 degrees each time they conduct an action to denote the expenditure of an action, this is not done so for opportunity fire. However, it does cost an action point to do so. So there's a give and take. You have to weigh the options. Let's see, and then I have exceptions. Opportunity fire may not be conducted against the moving unit starting hex. Again, subject to change. Unit conducting opportunity fire may only fire once per each hex the moving unit enters. Simplified take as opposed to each movement point expended, unless, of course, maintaining rate of fire. That's different. And this is probably going to get chucked out the window, but I also have opportunity fire is not allowed against a unit that moves only one hex, unless moving adjacent. So I have options to consider. I need to tighten this stuff up, do some weeding. Well, that is the standard section of opportunity fire. Then you have a secondary section of opportunity fire. Why? Because you have this thing called AI within Advanced Platoon Leader. Proper AI. And just temporarily, I have opportunity fire question mark regarding AI. Never if a unit moves only one hex, unless moving adjacent. Always if a player's unit moves adjacent and or moves in the open and within range and line of sight. Otherwise, an AI unit may fire if its firepower is equal to or greater than double the player's terrain modifier. So, easy way of putting that is, if it's economically to a unit's advantage to fire, it's going to do so. If the terrain effects are too much such that it is not economical to do so, it won't. So that's opportunity fire. A brief look at it. In a number of systems, I would love, and I know I say this nearly every episode, and rarely, if ever, do any of you respond, but it is appreciated if you were so inclined to do so. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think about opportunity fire? What are your favorite systems that portray this? What do you think they get right? What do you think they get wrong? I'd be glad to hear it, because your opinions will, whether I like it or not, or intend to or not, it's going to affect and or influence the design of this thing, and I want it to, I guess. I want this to be a reflection of you guys' preferences and likes. Perhaps there's something we can do a little more different, a little more realistic, a little more innovative. But it might be something we have to work through together. So let me know what you guys think as the cat coils up like a spring to launch itself onto my leg and bury its claws and climb up to my lap. Yeah, so what do you think? Let me know. That's it for this special episode of Hexes and Soldiers War Game Podcast, Case Studies episode number 1 regarding opportunity fire. Again, I hope to have more of these in the future as I run into problems, run headlong into design and development with Advanced Platoon Leader as it relates to certain concepts. So, that said, I'll let you guys go. Thanks for listening, and keep gaming.
Heaven's rain falls upon faces of the children who look skyward, twisting metal through the air, scars and screams so you might know it's pure rain. Seashells whistle, let your mind drift away. Seashells whistle, let yourself mouthing the sounds, face turning the frowns, like the lips of command. Torn in the heart, you're playing a part. Courage it is so demanding. Loud brassing bands, marching through lands. Life's that you had is near. Heaven's army falls upon the skirts of Mother Earth and then flies skyward, twisting wings through the air, lift the soul so you might know his fury. Seashells whistle, let your mind drift away. Seashells whistle, let yourself hide away. Dressed in white silk rain, you marry the pains. You kneel in the church, bright steel. A new morning arrives, share the same skies. I'm brotherring a lamp full of peace. As the memory fades on the edge of a blade, you return, you're sure that you will. From the frame in your hand, a smile expands, hang from a thread of glass tears.
Dennis Arthur Smith, listed missing. Corporal John Charles Edward Smith, killed in action. Private Jonathan Leslie Smith,